Magnus retreats the knight to c5, and that's a blunder.
No!
Alright, let's see how Magnus blunders against Vishy Anand in this one from the World Rapid 2017 in Riyadh. Magnus with the white pieces in this one. Okay, Nimzo Indian defense denoted by bishop b4. We have a couple more developing moves in. Okay, the bishop is asked a question, which promptly takes the knight, recaptures, takes, c5. Pretty standard move. Putting some pressure on this trio of white pawns here. Knight f4, queen develops, bishop back. A move that's somewhat forced if you're trying something else. Well, pawn takes, bishop's in the line of fire of the queen. Magnus would have had to retreat his bishop here, and that's just bad. So Magnus retreats his bishop. Okay, b6. Getting ready to fianchetto this bishop. Magnus fianchettos his own bishop. And right now it looks pretty dumb staring at this pawn, but I think he's anticipating the position to open up, and you definitely want to be on this long diagonal. Okay, fianchettos, castles, knight d7. Look at that. Look at these the major pieces lining up on the C and D files. Okay, queen b3. Knight g4, threatening mate. Well, not yet, but the idea here is to first take out this knight and then deliver checkmate. Magnus obviously sees this, plays g3 to defend against that. Vishy moves his knight back. Its job is done. Alright, rook centralizes. Knight e4, a retreating knight move to e1. Another retreating knight move. Look at this repositioning here. Okay, pawn break here with d5. Takes. Okay, Vishy pushes his own pawn forward, hits the queen. What's the queen gonna do? Alright, c2. Okay, b5, solidifying this pawn duo here. Knight g2. Okay, a bunch of knight moves. Queen steps to the side. Bishop attacks this rook, which steps forward. Queen c3, threatening mate. Alright, look at this. Dual purpose move, defending laterally while also hitting the bishop, which retreats. Okay, Vishy doubling his rooks along this d file here. Queen b4, hitting the knight. Okay, which jumps into this outpost on b3. Magnus jumps into his own outpost on e6, and wow, look. What is this knight not doing right? Also coordinating with the bishop on this g7 square. Okay, rook, knight takes rook, recaptures. Knight c8, not even moving the rook out of the way. You know, I think Anand would actually be happy to see this exchange. You never want to see an enemy knight in your territory on the 6th rank. You know, knights are normally 3-point pieces, but this knight is probably a 5-point piece. Okay, so knight c8. Magnus takes the pawn on b5. Takes. A lot of pieces flying off the board. The queen is hit, which retreats, offering this queen trade. Vishy says no. And keep in mind, if you're taking the knight, well, there goes your bishop. So, okay, Vishy blocks with his knight instead, defends the bishop. This knight is still hanging. Magnus retreats the knight to c5, and that's a blunder. That's a blunder. What's the move here? What's the move? All right, here we go. The move is the move played in the game. Rook takes knight. The point is that once the rook is recaptured, can you spot it? Yeah, the only winning move here for black. Yeah, it's just queen e4. Setting up this battery and this mate threat here. And in this position, Magnus resigned. If you're trying to run away with the king, this is how play would continue. You deliver this other check with the bishop. King d2 only move, and the knight swoops in. and that's a forkaruski. If you're black here, you first take the rook and then take the queen, and you're just a full minor piece up. It's game over. So just rewinding here a bit. Instead of Magnus's move played here, knight c5, what he should have done is just to retreat the knight back to f4, hitting the rook and not being in a position to get taken out by the rook, and simultaneously opening the eyes of this bishop along this diagonal. One of the other alternative moves, the second best move according to the computer, is just to slide the queen here to c3. It's less ideal, but it does prevent the queen from taking this knight unless you want to hang mate in 1. Anything except what Magnus played, knight c5, which again allowed this clearance sacrifice, allowing the queen to swoop in here to e4, and that's just game over. Alright, in this next game we have Magnus Carlsen on the black end against Vishy Anand, and this game is from the World Championship match in 2014. Let's see what happens in this one. We have a Queen's Gambit declined, a couple developing moves, e3, knight d7. Okay, Vishy pushes his pawn forward to c5. Magnus says don't go any further. Bishop d3. Alright, Magnus hitting at the head of the pawn chain. Vishy defends. Magnus hits again. Vishy defends. Bishop a6, inviting this exchange of bishops. Keep in mind this is Magnus's bad bishop. Look how many pawns he has on light squares. The bishops are in fact exchanged, and Vishy pushing his pawn forward. Takes, pushing the other pawn forward, hitting the knight. Where's it going to go? Nowhere. Look at that sneaky defense. If you take the knight, I'm taking yours with check, and you can block, but my bishop is coming in to take the pawn on a3, and this is completely winning for black. Okay, so instead of taking the knight, yeah, Vishy just pushes even further, supported by the bishop. Okay, Magnus pushing his own pawns, knight b5, second defender. Rook c1, third defender. The pawn isn't going anywhere. Okay, Magnus knight e4. Vishy knight g5. Wasn't that just a blunder? Attacked twice, defended once. Let's see what happens if he takes twice on this square. Ah. Yeah, it's not working because of knight d6. Flushing out the queen. Yeah, this bishop had an important role to watch over this d6 square. And actually, in this position, the computer doesn't even like the queen moving away. It likes something like b3. Because if you're moving away with the queen, well, yeah, the pawn is promoting and you're losing the queen anyway. So, okay. Magnus does not take twice on the square. Instead, he just brings in the other knight to support this one. A pair of knights comes off the board. Okay, Vishy says, get out of my house, knight. Magnus says, okay, you take mine, I take yours, which is exactly what happens. Okay, Vishy takes the pawn on a4. It looks like you're just winning a pawn, but okay, rook a5, and the pawn is recovered. Look at that. Just 2 steps away from promotion himself. Pawn takes. Okay, we have a bunch of pawns coming off the board. Queen to d7. Yeah, you don't want your queen to be the blockader of this pawn ideally. Castles. Yeah, sure enough, the rook becomes the blockader. Rook c6. Okay, Magnus striking at the bishop, which calmly retreats. Bishop b4. Yeah. Note, you can't take the bishop unless you want to lose your rook. Okay, rook a1, making sure this pawn here doesn't get too active. Magnus plays a5, bishop a5, which is a blunder. Well, it's not exactly a blunder, but it's definitely a step in the wrong direction according to this to the computer because of this queen a6 move. Okay, well, this pawn is now attacked 3 times, defended only twice. Yeah, Magnus takes out the pawn with the bishop. Yeah, okay, but the queen just calmly retreats to c4. And how are you getting out of this pin? Okay, Magnus, in a move of desperation, throws his pawn forward, but yeah, Vishy just takes. Okay, Magnus sacrificing his rook, and it looks like the game continues for a few more moves, but yeah, after rook c1, Magnus resigned. I mean, how are you getting out of this pin exactly? You're not. I mean, you're either losing a bishop or your rook. Just to illustrate here, I mean, yeah, completely winning for white. So let's just step back here to this critical moment. After rook a1, again Magnus played bishop a5, which was a losing move. It looks like in this position the computer actually just likes a calm move on the other side of the board, something like g4. Basically saying that, yeah, this pawn on c7 looks scary, but it's going to be very difficult for white to promote that pawn. Let's just play out a few more moves. If the queen goes to a6 in this position, yeah, the rook moves to a5 and flushes out the queen. And yeah, it's attacking the bishop, but bishop calmly retreats, and this is basically a drawn position. But what if, let's see. Okay, Magnus played bishop a5, queen a6, and Magnus took this pawn. But what if instead of taking the pawn, Magnus realizes his mistake and just calmly goes back to b4? Okay, yeah, rook b6 is the move, hitting this bishop, and if the bishop retreats, yeah, rook b8 is a killer. 2 attackers on this rook, only 1 defender, and obviously you can't take the rook because, yeah, you're making another queen. So interesting, very interesting game in this one, and remarkable that the queen in this position just likes Magnus to stand pat and play this calm move on the other side of the board, but instead he got a little too antsy and wanted to flush the queen away. It's a perfectly natural move, this bishop a5. I mean, you're hitting the queen, you're adding another attacker on the c7 pawn, but yeah, after the bishop took, it got put in a pin, and yeah, Magnus ultimately just couldn't get out of it.